I'm going to do this boundaries question first. I never remember where in the Bible things are, so you'll have to ask a rabbi on this. There is somewhere in, I don't know if it's Leviticus or Numbers or Deuteronomy, probably Numbers, where someone is visiting the people of Israel and is fascinated by the fact that the way the tents are laid out is that you can't see directly from one tent into another because of the openings. They're staggered because there is a notion of privacy, and the design of the temple as well, with boundaries and curtains and the this and the that, and who's allowed in and when are they allowed in, and these. And it's those boundaries that enable intimacy. If there isn't the boundary, you can't have intimacy. It's paradoxical. It's the opposite. The sick idea or the unhealthy idea is that to have intimacy, it's a free for all. Everyone's all in it together. But if you think about a situation where everyone's all in it together, you have a room with 30 people. Everyone's like this. No one can be close because this is a public setting. So you need boundaries for intimacy. You can't have one without the other. Now, the model which I use for relationships, which is actually straight out of the big book. Let's see what page. It's from the Family Afterward. And there's a great line. This is 122, page 122. All members of the family should meet upon the common ground of tolerance, understanding, and love. And now, if there is a common ground, for there to be such a thing, there must be something which is not common ground. If everything is common ground, you don't need a word for it. So if there is common ground, there is something which is not common ground. What's not common ground? It's still private ground. And I've read a few things recently about how improper it is to pry into your other half's phone, computer, diary, whatever. That they must be allowed their private domain, and I am also allowed my private domain. And then there is a common domain. So we now have 3 domains. You have your private domain, I have my private domain, and then we have the common ground. And the common ground is where I meet. And the advice that was given to me relatively recently by someone, religious, not in the program, was that if your other half has character defects, those character defects are their own private business. And the way you learn to live with them over time is you practice the virtue of modesty. If someone were undressing, you would turn away. If someone has their character defects, you turn away. So it's not that you see them, stare at them, judge them, and then paste forgiveness over the top, having been staring at the character. You look away. It's modesty as a principle. Now, what is a boundary, therefore? Now we've got the system, which is I have my private domain, you have your private domain, we have common ground. What are the boundaries? And the boundaries are where I draw the line for what is my private domain, where you draw the line for what is your private domain, and where we draw the line for what the common domain is. Now, for a domain to be common domain, we both have to agree it is common domain. If you're not willing to bring something to the common domain, it ain't common domain. We've both got to be willing. I've been in a relationship with someone for 14 years who is not in recovery, does not need to be in recovery, but is eccentric, to say the very least. And he's an interesting character, and he had some terrible problems at work a few years ago. He never brought the work problems home. I never found out fully what was going on. There was something going on. Why didn't he bring them into the common domain at home? Because he didn't want the common domain at home to be infected by the psychodrama of what was going on in the workplace. But for about a year and a half, he wasn't present. A little bit here and there, but he was very preoccupied. So for that period of the relationship, a year and a half, we had a very small common domain, which is what you're talking about there. When you set certain boundaries, you've got 15 minutes a day. Sometimes the common domain is small. My job was not to judge, well, we should be having a deeper relationship. We should be spending more time together. We should be doing this. We should be doing that. Those were my demands. The universe is not interested in my demands. I have to work out, well, what is available here? And he wasn't available. Why? Because he was preoccupied with other stuff. It wasn't addiction, but he was preoccupied with other stuff. He didn't have the emotional space to bring more than a few minutes a day to the relationship. And that was fine. And he got past it, and we're all right. It's not a problem. Now, fortunately, I was, 18 years sober at the time. I had enough sense to realise that everything passes, everything changes. However anything is, it's not going to stay like that. So let's just wait and see what happens. I waited and saw what happened. It worked itself out. He became more available. But I thought to myself, if he's never more available than this, that's fine by me. This is still the person I've chosen to be with, so I'm going to give to this person. I'm going to forgive this person for everything. Who knows what benefit my giving to him has in the rest of his life. So the relationship is not there for me. There's someone gave us an anniversary card a couple of years ago we like dogs and cats a lot, so the cards we get usually have dogs and cats involved. And it was a picture of a boat going down a river, and in the prow of the boat were two Labradors looking out very proudly. And this was the anniversary card. And the image in Western civilization, if that's what we can call what we find ourselves in, I'm not sure how Western it is, I'm not sure whether it's civilized or not, but let's call it that, is a relationship is you get two broken people and you put them together and somehow you're going to get wholeness out of it. And that's not the model that I've found useful or helpful. If I'm bringing my brokenness into the relationship, I'm now, that brokenness is going to infect the common ground. The purpose of the relationship is to build a vessel to carry us down the river of life, which is far stronger than the vessel that either one of us could build alone. It's to build something bigger, something stronger, that can house maybe children, maybe lots of sponsees. Who knows what is going to be carried in the vessel. My other half is in charge of the sexual health for the whole of Greater London. So this is a lot of responsibility. We don't have children, but we have responsibility. He couldn't do his job the way he does it if he didn't have strength from the relationship. I couldn't do what I do if I didn't have the strength from the relationship. So the purpose is to build a vessel which is strong enough to carry the both of us. It's not to fix me, it's not to fix him. So the question when looking at a relationship, who is a suitable person to have a relationship with? Well, there might be lots of characteristics that are interesting and exciting and fun, but the real question is, what are your shipbuilding skills like? Do you have the skills to build a ship that will carry both of us down? Now, so the question of boundaries. One of the boundaries, one type of boundary I have in my life is I have a private domain, and that is my private domain. And within that private domain, I do the work that I need to do to keep myself well, and I invite people into that. My sponsor, my other two closest friends in recovery, some other friends in recovery, and we do the work we need to do on me so that I have a whole healthy person to bring to this relationship with someone else. And a few years ago, I had some mental and emotional struggles in the relationship. Of course, everyone is going to have these. And I was in Texas at the time. My sponsor lives in Texas. So when he says come to Texas, I come to Texas. The Manchester is easy for me compared to Texas. And anyway, he got me to spend some time with a man called Jim, who got sober in 1957, and is still alive, still sober, still helping people. And I told him about these emotional difficulties, and he said, do not bring these emotional difficulties into the relationship. They're your own private matter. You have no right to impose them on the other person. Deal with them wherever you need to deal with them. Take yourself out of the situation if you are at risk of leaking. But those difficulties are your problem. Then the other person is going to have their own stuff. They don't need your stuff to deal with on top of their stuff. So that's a big that's one type of boundary, is that I need to be careful about, and I'm very careful about who I let into the inner sanctum. There are curtains in the temple for a reason. You don't want just anyone going in there. The rules of cleanliness about who you let right the way into the holy temple are there for a reason, and this all has spiritual significance. In my life, I don't let people into the inner sanctum of my life unless their hands are clean. Because I don't want someone processing my stuff through their unprocessed stuff and having their response come back at me contaminated by stuff they haven't dealt with. So I'm very careful. So boundaries, how am I able to bring a whole person to the relationship in order to have intimacy in the relationship? It's because I'm boundaried and deal with the stuff in the appropriate place. So it's the boundaries which actually enable the intimacy. If I didn't deal with that stuff, I would have to be guarded in my relationship with my other half, because there'd be all of this stuff whirling around that I hadn't dealt with. So it's actually the opposite of what you think. The boundaries are necessary for intimacy. The next question, so once I'm sorted out, I've got the boundaries around me, there is the common ground. And what gets to be the time that we spend together? Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. Who has what job in the household? I do lots of the jobs in the household because I'm just more competent at them. Let's face it. There are one of the benefits of being someone that is fit for Al-Anon or S-Anon. The chances are you're pretty competent. You're going to be good at organising stuff. You're going to pay the bill now, not in 6 months' time. It comes in through the door, it gets paid, it goes straight out again. There are lists of all the things that need to be done. The list gets worked down systematically. These are not character defects in themselves. So I have jobs, I have my own jobs. He has things he takes care of in the relationship. It all works itself out, but we have common ground. But the question is, with boundaries in that common ground, so how does one operate in that common ground? And this is where the traditions, I'm going to go slightly off-piste as compared to where I was going to go. I want to talk about the traditions and how they can be used in relationships. And the first principle we've already talked about is actually tradition 4. So each group is autonomous except in as far as it affects other groups or AA as a whole. I am autonomous You are autonomous. I'm responsible for me. You're responsible for you. Except in as far as it affects someone else. That's when, so your sickness over there, it's your business. When it starts to affect me, it might start to become my business, but I've got to ask why it's becoming my business. If your sickness is affecting me because I have the ludicrous, insane demand that I can only be okay if you're okay, it's affecting me because of me. It's not affecting me because of natural laws of the universe. It's affecting me because I'm interfering and I have plans for other people's lives. What I mean by affecting someone else, if you're late for the airport, we're both going to miss the plane. That's an example of where it would affect anyone, whatever their spiritual status. So there are certain things. So we have a boundary in place, which is a little rule that we have to follow as a couple, is that I organise he's late for everything, I'm early for everything. I organise the timing, and we've got a system now where I work out when we need to leave for the airport. I then bring it back an hour, so there is an extra hour. He says, when do we need to leave for the airport? I add another 45 minutes. There was one journey about 10 years ago where we had to get 2 or 3 trains to get to the airport. Each of the trains, we leapt onto the train as the doors were closing. It was the last train that would have got us there. We only just made it. Never doing that again. So now we have a system, and the boundary is understood. So that's what boundaries look like in the common ground, is this is the way we are doing things. Now the question is, how do those boundaries get agreed? Unfortunately, it's very rare that I get to set a unilateral boundary, without some kind of agreement. So I'm trying to think of the last time. I'll give you an example of a unilateral boundary I set without the other person's agreement. My mother, for various reasons, has had a very tricky life. She was brought up in Europe during the war. My father was in a camp, survived the camp, came back, but she was beaten by her mother throughout her childhood. The father was away, lots of tension in the family. The sister was always the favourite. My mother has lost 3 sons. One daughter is mentally handicapped and mentally ill as well. So it's a very difficult life by any stretch of the imagination. So I understand that. But she doesn't do it anymore. She's 89 now. Shouting and critical, or at least very critical and harping on at something. It wouldn't let things go. Particularly, she would perceive some difficulty or worry about. She was a great worrier. I don't know if any of you have ever been worriers or have ever known a great worrier. If you've got a great worrier in the house, sometimes you'll go into another room to get away from the worry, and they bring the worry with them. You've left your worry behind. Here it is for you. And so, I would tell her something about my career life, and she would say immediately. Her mind would think of all the possible things that would go wrong, and she would systematically review them. And the unilateral boundary was, I'm fine with the decision I've made. I'm not willing to discuss the decision. If you have worries about my life, I'm not the right person to discuss them with. You'll have to discuss them with someone else. If you carry on, I am going to gently put the phone down and call you back for a chat about something the next day. And this was and I've had to have the same thing with sponsees who become aggressive or manipulative or all sorts of other things on the phone. Say, this is my final word on this. They start arguing. This is not a negotiation or a discussion. This is a notification. This is what is going to happen. But that's an absolute last resort. I escalate towards that. So in setting boundaries, I have 5 stages of a boundary setting process. And a boundary in the common ground of the relationship is where we hopefully agree what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Now, the first thing that I can do to set a boundary in a relationship is to make a polite request. And I'll give you a couple of examples of polite requests. At the moment, our neighbours 2 flats down have got a cat who we've, whatever reason, she's got another name, but we refer to her as Magic Kitten. Now, Magic, I work at home during the day. There's a cat flap 2 doors down, so the cat comes out. They're out during the day. She knows I'm in during the day, and so it gets to about 9:10 in the morning here, outside, and it doesn't stop until I let her in, and so I let her in. But we're not allowed to feed the cat. We're not supposed to feed the cat. Apparently the cat throws up if it's given anything, but it's very special food. It's got very special food in number 29, row number 33. So we're not allowed to feed the cat. But we've discovered when she comes to visit us, she gets so comfortable she doesn't want to leave. And the only way to get her out is to put a little bit of cooked chicken on a plate outside the front door of the flat. She trots out and then we close the door. And then she will go downstairs to the flat where she's supposed to be. And the polite request to Jonathan, was he's incredibly boundaried with everyone in the universe except the cat. The cat has got him wrapped around her little paw. He feeds her ham and chicken all day long, and then we try and get her out by putting chicken on the plate. She's sitting there, she's full of chicken already. She's not interested, and it's a challenge to get her out. We have to get her out because she lives downstairs. We can't keep her in overnight because she licks your face at 3 o'clock in the morning if you don't. So the polite request is, Jonathan, please don't feed the cat during the day, or we can't get her out at night. Just can we agree that? And how we do this is we apply tradition 2. So we have a little group conscience. I'll say, there's something I'd like to discuss. There's something I think is important. This is why I think it's important. Could we agree this? And I make a polite request and I say, would you be able to agree to that? And the answer is either yes or no. The second way I can negotiate something in a relationship, if the polite request doesn't work, we have what we call the transaction. And the transaction might go something like this. Maybe you'll recognise this situation. If you come with me to see my parents this weekend, I'll go with you to see yours next weekend. Deal? Like, if I just say, oh, come and see my mother this weekend, the long face and the sighing and the... No, but if you offer a transaction, they're happy with it. So if you do this for me, I can do this for you. Deal? And it's all under the heading of tradition 2. We agree. Anything on the common ground must, where possible, be agreed. And the application of concept 12 is incredibly important. Democracy. And concept 4, right of participation. If you have a stake in the outcome, you have a voice in the process. And so concept 12 is discussion, vote and substantial unanimity. If there are 2 of you, that means both of you have to agree. So to recap, you can make a polite request to set a boundary. You can offer a transaction. Then you've got two further stages before you get to the final lever, and it's an overt threat and a covert threat. An overt, and I have this with sponsees because they're the people in my life who are most likely to behave badly. I've got my life arranged such that there are very few badly behaved people, but with sponsees you get, I'm badly behaved with my sponsor on occasion. I expect sponsees to be badly behaved with me. But that's a very good place to practice boundary setting, by the way, because if you break the sponsee, they'll go and get another sponsor. They'll be fine. So you can practice boundaries in sponsorship, get it wrong, and you both go separate ways and it's fine. You get it wrong in a marriage and it can be 5 years before it's resolved. So practice on the sponsees because it's a safer environment. So what you've got is the overt threat and the covert threat. Now by threat it sounds a bit aggressive, and I don't mean it to sound aggressive. So the overt boundary is this, and it's basically setting a condition. I will talk to you about your emotional problems when you complete your step 8. Have you completed your step 8? No. Well, complete your step 8. Once you've completed that, we'll talk. Or I want you to get a service at 3 meetings. Once you've got service at 3 meetings, then we'll talk. Unless you're willing to demonstrate you're willing to help other people, then I'm not willing. I can only help you if you're helping other people. So you try the polite request. Oh, please get a commitment. You try the transaction. It doesn't work. You go to the condition. Yeah, but you don't want to start there. You want to start with the polite request first to try and get substantial unanimity. You've got the condition. And that can be the overt conditional threat or the covert one. Now, the covert one could be classed as manipulation, but sometimes it's actually legitimate. Partly to save people's face. So there is such a thing as politeness and tact and consideration, and those dictate that sometimes things have to be done silently. So silence is not always a manipulative technique, it can be a legitimate technique. I'll give you an example. I don't know if ever you know anyone who's ever aggressive in text messages, nasty little text messages. Perhaps that's just a London thing. No. I've got. If I respond to an aggressive text message, I'm giving the other person the message. It's legitimate to communicate with me that way. If I ignore it, I'm sending the message. If you want a response from me, you're going to have to be more polite than that. Then 2 days later, I get a polite message. Now we're in business. Now we can proceed. So this is a covert. This is setting a covert condition. My sponsor calls this killer whale training. So at SeaWorld in Florida, where people go to see the dolphins and the whales and the these and the those, the way they train these animals is when the animal does what it's supposed to do and it behaves itself, it gets a treat. And if it does something naughty, it's ignored. So you're teaching the whale or the dolphin or the sponsee or the child or the husband. If you want to play, you're going to have to play nicely. If you want to come to the table, you have to observe the rules of the table. And this can be done silently by basically only responding to appropriate behaviour and not responding if it's inappropriate. And the last method is force. So sometimes a boundary is legitimate and the request doesn't work, the transaction doesn't work, the overt condition doesn't work, the covert condition doesn't work. This is when you change the locks, you block the number, you do whatever it is to stop you leave with the suitcase and you do not leave a forwarding address. It's whatever is necessary to stop the abuse from continuing. You report them to I've had to report people to the police in recovery. People in recovery to the police because the behaviour becomes criminal. But the safe way to do this is to escalate through that system so that you're giving people the dignity of being able to agree to the boundary on a rational basis. Rather, you don't treat them straight away like the naughty child. You give them a chance to come at it like an adult. If they won't come at it like an adult, then you escalate. And if you do that, you can set boundaries without being cast in the role of I'm the school mistress and you're the child, which doesn't help intimacy, by the way. And just to cover the other, and I think you said something about detachment, enabling you to come at the relationship from a more healthy point of view. There is a period, when I detach from unhealthiness, and it took about 10 years with my mother. I detached from a lot of unhealthy behaviour. I was only available for healthy behaviour. There was no healthy behaviour available on the other side, and it took a long time before both of us were at the table able to offer something healthy and positive. But it's there now. We've done it. We've got a healthy relationship. But you're right, you have to set the boundary first. You readjust within that, and from that position of healthiness, you now have something more healthy to offer. There was another question about boundaries and sex, and if you've got someone who is not sober in the S fellowship, one of the S fellowships. One of the factors is depends on whether what they're doing would put you in danger. Not to put too fine a point on it, but if it's going to put you in danger, that it's absolutely legitimate to. I'm not going to have anything to do with you until the behaviour is stopped. You've been tested. It's gone for 3 months. We know that there's nothing there. But that's so it depends what the slip is. If the slip is that they're looking at pictures on the internet, or the slip is they're going to a venue somewhere, these are very different types of slip. And the thing about boundaries, and this is how to come at that topic, because it's a delicate and difficult topic, and the big book says we're not the arbiters of other people's sex conduct, so I would never tell anyone what to do in this area. But a good way of looking at it, like to what extent do I detach from the other person, is with sponsees. If you sponsor people who have addictions, it is a close relationship, and the question is, how much do I engage with the other person when they're in relapse of some sort? And relapse in the world of recovery can mean they're actually drinking again, or it could mean they're engaging in other behaviour. In my experience, most men in AA have got sex addiction problems on some level, or sex/romantic fantasy problems. There's a fellowship called Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, and I wonder why the word love is in there. I'm not sure it's got anything to do with love. Sex and romance addiction. Personal opinion, if any of that's heard on the tape, we have no opinion on other fellowships. I probably shouldn't have said that, but there we go. But I'll have sponsees at any particular point who are acting out in various ways. And my question is, there's a line in the big book about it's on 70. Suppose we fall short of the chosen ideal and stumble. Does this mean we're going to get drunk? Some people tell us so, but this is only a half truth. It depends on us and our motives. If we are sorry for what we have done and have the honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we will be forgiven and will have learned our lesson. If we're not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we're quite sure to drink. We're not theorising, these are facts out of our experience. And with alcoholism, either they're drinking or they're not. And it's my experience and observation with people who come into AA. If they come into AA and they do everything they're told, the drinking is going to stop and it's going to stop now, they're fine. Sex addiction, food problems, whether it's binging, purging, starving, whatever, restricting, gambling, all of the behavioural ones which are not to do with substances per se. Food is partly to do with substances, but it's not in the same order as alcohol because it's natural substances. My experience myself, because I've had problems with food, I've had problems with sex, I've had problems with all sorts of things. And my experience with sponsees, I've seen people being absolutely sincere about wanting to recover, but it takes a while before abstinence fully kicks in. And if for whatever reason after a few months or a few years there's a slip on the abstinence, it's very difficult to break. Once someone has started to slip, it's very difficult to break. And they can be absolutely sincere, but the monster hasn't let go yet. And so whether I engage with continue to engage with a sponsee who is in relapse, either on a behaviour or an addictive pattern, has got very much to do with sincerity of effort. If they're sincerely making an effort and being honest, I'm willing to give them a lot more rope. If there's no sincerity, if there's lying, if there's deceit, if there are promises which are not followed through by action, very little sympathy there. Once you're showing the action, then I will match my enthusiasm. I can only match your enthusiasm for your own recovery. I can't exceed it. And that's a very good test with boundaries with someone else in recovery, is not to offer more, not to bring more to the table than they're bringing to the table. Does that make sense? Otherwise you're making up for their lack of willingness. And the other topic on powerlessness versus responsibility, because you had the question about, well, if they're powerless, to what extent do you just let them get on with it, and where does the responsibility start? If someone is trying to lift a concrete block with their hands and failing, they are powerless over the concrete block. If there is a crane next to them, and there is then they're being offered instruction by a crane operator about how to operate the crane, they're powerless on their own over the concrete block, but there is a solution. If they want to operate the crane under the instruction of a crane operator, that concrete block get lifted today. So they are powerless, they don't lack responsibility. They're powerless, but a power is available. That's the whole point of the world of recovery. So as soon as someone has the offer of recovery, it is their responsibility to access that power. So they're powerless but not helpless. And there is, are you familiar with the Al-Anon detachment sheet? You know how long the Al-Anon books are? They're very, very thick books. It takes a very long time to read them. The Al-Anon detachment sheet has the virtue of being 2 pages. Just 2. And it gives you a very clear rundown on what detachment is. And one of the things it suggests is that we don't create a crisis, but we don't prevent a crisis if it's in the natural course of things. And 8 years ago, I was very, very close to a friend of mine in recovery who was mid-relapse, had been in relapse for 3 years. And it got to a point where this person's self-destructiveness was so painful to me to observe, unavoidably so because I cared about this person, I had to say, I can't have any further contact until you've gone into treatment, got off the drugs, got off the pills, got off the booze, and have completed your amends. You've got to go through the program, complete the amends, then we can talk. I'm not going to talk until then because I'm not willing to be exposed to your self-destruction. It's too painful for me. And that's the point at which I stopped being, I didn't want to be a doormat anymore. I didn't want to have to take it anymore. And you get to choose where that line is. Too much for one person is not too much for another. And the early Al-Anon literature, if you want to dip into Al-Anon literature, there's one of the early books is One Day at a Time in Al-Anon. And it's got a very different tone, in my experience, than has anyone come across that one? It's got a very different tone than the more recent Al-Anon literature. It appears to be written, I don't know this for sure, I have to check this out with my friend. I suspect it was written by a very small handful of people, if not one person, because the tone is so consistent throughout, the voice is so consistent throughout. And it's very much about I'm responsible for me. I'm responsible for my emotional life. If I'm troubled by this, that's my problem. And we're not going to tell anyone else what to do about boundaries, about do you leave him, do you stay? Up to you. But you get to choose, and it is not cruel, particularly when someone has been given a solution, to say, you have a solution available. When you grab the solution, I will become available as well, but until then, I'm not willing to put up with this anymore. Does that answer your question about the powerlessness and responsibility?
I think so. I need to think about that. Yeah. Thank you.
There's a lot of material. Would you like another break?
Got some coffee.
Good. I'm going to get some air and then we'll think about some questions for the next bit.